The kettle had gone cold on the stove and nobody had moved to touch it. Kael sat on the kitchen floor with his back against the cupboard doors and his hands open on his knees. And behind him, in the chair by the window, Tam sat with his eyes closed and his head tipped very slightly towards the light. The way a man sits when he has finished something. There was no noise in that house. There was no wind and no rain and no clock. There was only Kael, breathing carefully, like a man carrying a full cup across a crowded room, because he was carrying 91 years of somebody else, and he was terrified of spilling any of it. The plate woke on the table. It was thin and grey, and it had been dark since the ravine, and now a pale light moved across it the way light moves under a door. 16 reached over and turned it flat so all of them could see it. No alarm, no summons, no procedure to attend. The system that had spent 91 years insisting there was a duplicate on its books had simply gone quiet and finished its arithmetic and written down the result, and it was neither sorry nor cruel about any of it. It was finished. That was all a system ever is. Kael picked it up. His hands were shaking so badly that Goku put one hand under his wrist to steady it, and neither of them said anything about that. There was one line on the plate where there had always been 3. No duplication flag, no reconciliation pending, no secondary designation. One word in the small, dull lettering that the archive used for facts too ordinary to argue with. Current. He read it 4 times, not a copy, not a spare, not the second attempt at somebody else, the only one. He had waited 30 parts of his short, strange life for a word that plain. They buried Tam in the yard behind the shop, against the low stone wall he had worked at for 61 years, where the light came over in the middle of the afternoon, and the flagstones were worn pale by one man walking the same 8 feet forever. Nobody made a speech. Goku wanted to, and Kael stopped him, gently, because Tam would have hated it, would have sat through it with his hands folded and his mouth doing that patient thing it did, waiting for everybody to be done being loud. So they stood in the grey morning and were quiet with him instead, which was the only language he had ever really used. The shop was still open behind them, in the way that shops are open when their owner has stepped out for a moment and never comes back. The shutter was half up. The bench was there, and the tools were there, laid out in the order of a man who had not needed to look at them for 40 years, every handle worn down into the shape of a hand that no longer existed. There was a shoe in the vise with one seam left to close. Kael stood in the doorway, looking at all of it, and understood, slowly, that it was his now and that he had absolutely no idea how any of it worked. Somebody came up the lane, not fast. Kael heard the footsteps before he turned, and something in the rhythm of them made his chest go tight, because they were even. Vegeta walked up to the wall on his own legs. No crutch, no shoulder to lean on, no ravine and no stretcher, and no lying to anybody about how bad it had been. He stopped and looked at the turned earth and folded his arms and said that he did not know why they had all been standing about looking useless when there was clearly a shop to run, which is how Vegeta says that he is glad. Kael laughed once, badly, and it hurt. And then Goku grinned. It came up on his face slowly, like weather clearing, and it was the first grin any of them had seen out of him since the day this whole thing started, since the tanks and the ledgers and the numbered rooms. He looked at Kael standing in a dead man's doorway with a dead man's tools behind him and a word on a plate in his hand, and he said the thing he had been holding on to for 30 parts and had never once been allowed to say out loud. He said, "I told you, you were always somebody." It only took the paperwork a while to catch up. 16 took the suit off in the yard. He did it the way you would expect him to do it, without ceremony, one clasp at a time, and the hazard grey came away in pieces and went down on the flagstones in a heap that looked far smaller on the ground than it had ever looked on a man. The faceplate went on top of it, that flat, dead black numeral facing the sky, and he did not look at it again. Underneath, there was just a person, greying at the temples, thinner than any of them had pictured, squinting in ordinary daylight like a man coming out of a long cinema in the afternoon. Kael asked him what it had actually been for. All those years sealed up in it, when the reconciliation had been over and done with for decades and there was nothing left out there to protect himself from. 16 thought about that for a while. He said that it had never been protection. He said that when you are the one still standing and somebody else stopped so that you could be, you spend the rest of your life looking for somewhere to put that, and a suit with a number on it is somewhere to put it. He said, I was not hiding from anybody. I was just trying not to be the one who was left. Then they offered him the name. It was Goku who said it, because of course it was. Take it. Tam. It is yours. It was always half yours. He was you and you were him, and there is nobody left alive who would grudge you a single letter of it. And for about 10 seconds, Kael wanted it more than he had ever wanted anything, because it came with a road and a trade and a shop and 61 years of somebody knowing where he was. And then he shook his head and gave it back and said that Tam had earned that one himself, all 91 years of it, and it was not going spare. He walked out into the middle of the yard on his own. Nobody followed him. He stood there with his head up and the sky going pale over the wall, and he said his own name out loud to absolutely nobody. The way you test a step before you put your weight on it. Kael, not a designation, not a line in a ledger, not a number some technician had written on a tank in wax pencil, not a dead prince's leftovers handed down to fill a gap, just his. The first thing in his whole life that had not been assigned to him by somebody else, and he had said it himself in his own voice, out loud, in a yard. The violet came back. It came up around him low and slow and very quiet, the way a stove comes back when you open the vent, and there was nothing in front of it. No enemy, no archive, no old man walking 4 miles down a road to find him. It just came back on, because it belonged to him, and it had been waiting in the dark for somebody to come home and claim it. Kael stood in it, with his hands loose and his tail hanging easy behind him, and for the first time since he had come out of that tank, nothing in him was arguing with anything else in him. He opened the shop 3 days later. The shutter went up halfway and stuck the way it always had, and he left it that way because that was how the neighbors knew. His first customer was a woman with a cracked heel and no patience, and she watched him make an absolute disaster of a simple seam, and told him so and left the shoe with him anyway, because her father had left shoes with the last one. Kael worked at that seam until the light went orange, badly, slowly, gladly, in a room that smelled of leather and glue, and it was the best day of his entire life. Somewhere else, in a room with no windows and no dawn coming, something woke up. A faceplate came on in the dark, cold and slow, with a numeral on it that was not 16. Closing an entry generates a notification. Notifications go out along the lines they were built to go out along, and nobody consulted Kael about which ones, and this one went somewhere he would never have sent it. In the dark, the glow steadied. Whatever was wearing that plate had just been told, in the small, dull lettering the archive keeps for facts too ordinary to argue with, that Kael existed, and it had been waiting a very long time to hear it. Kael stood in the shop doorway at dusk, with the violet just barely on him and his tail loose and the smell of the day still on his hands. 30 parts to become one person. Not the copy, not the spare, not the second attempt, and not the last one standing over anybody either. Just Kael, current, the only one, in a doorway that was his, on a road that was his, in a life that had been handed to him by a kind old man who had done the arithmetic and decided he could afford it. The arc closes here, the story does not. Something out there knows his name now, and he did not tell it.